Well, good day there, everybody. This is Joe Van Cleve, and welcome to episode 5 of Reversal Print Processing. This is a continuing series that explores my journey toward learning how to do in-camera direct positive reversal prints. And so I know there are a lot of people that like to search YouTube and looking for how-to videos. You know, I need to go learn how to do this. I need to go how to learn to change the clutch in my car. I'm going to go search that out and the guy will tell me on the video. Well, this video is not a how-to video. This video is documenting my journey, my exploration, and learning how to do this. So you'll learn a little bit, hopefully, during this episode. Maybe I'm getting closer to finalizing the process. Okay, some weeks ago, back on the 19th of September, in fact, according to my notes here, I went out and did a test out by the Sandia Mountains here northeast of Albuquerque using two different kinds of paper. I was using a resin-coated grade 2 glossy paper, and then I'm using a luster or matte finish multi-grade paper. Of course, I got two entirely different results, as you might be able to tell. The lighter image is the grade 2 RC paper, glossy finish, and it was exposed at an ISO of 0.8, which is 2 stops below ISO 3. That's a quarter second at f5.6. I bleached it for 10 minutes in a 15% solution of hydrogen peroxide and citric acid. I gave it a really slight second exposure, but it was enough to darken the edges significantly here. The left-hand image, much contrastier and darker. This was the Ilford resin-coated multi-grade paper. So this is variable contrast paper. It responds to the color of daylight and giving you a high contrast image. It's a luster finish, not so glossy. This was given an ISO 1.6, so half the exposure of the other one. And the same pre-flash of 8 seconds. So this was an eighth of a second at f5.6. It's a much different contrast grade, though. It was bleached for the same amount of time, the 10 minutes, and the same second exposure. So basically, what I learned from this test several weeks ago is there's a huge amount of difference in the properties of these two papers. And going forward, I decided that I think what I needed to do is stick with one type of paper for my experiments until I get things ironed out. And so I've decided I'm going to stick with grade 2 paper because I won't have as much problems with figuring out the contrast of the paper as it varies with the color of light from early in the morning to midday to late in the afternoon. Direct sun versus shade, etc. I won't have that variability, but I don't really like the glossy looking paper. So I ordered recently a box of Arista from Freestyle Photo, the same brand as this, the same grade 2 resin coated paper, but I ordered some in a matte finish. I did a number of tests today, and the first round of 4 or 5 tests weren't going too well. I started off using the 15% solution of bleaching agent that I used 2 weeks ago for this other test. And just to see what would happen, I was also using the developer. For the first developer, I was using the same paper developer also that was 2 weeks old. And I did not get good results. So the image is very washed out, dark, very low contrast. There's no real highlights. The shadows are very muted. This is that luster finish grade 2 paper, but the results here are not because of the paper itself. It's just because of I was using old chemistry. So the results from these first few prints were very discouraging. I had replaced the 2-week-old bleaching agent with fresh 15% bleaching agent, 3 teaspoons of citric acid powder. I bleached this print for over 20, I think it was close to 40 minutes, and this is as light as it would go. I never could get the highlights to bleach out all the way to paper white, and as a result, when you do the second exposure and the second development, this is what you get. The highlights in the finished print are dependent on how much bleaching you got. If you want really bright highlights that are close to paper white, you're going to have to bleach the paper out after the first development to near paper white. It was a real puzzling thing. I went ahead and after this, I went ahead and added more peroxide to raise the concentration to 18%, and I added 1 more teaspoon of citric acid powder to make a total of 4 teaspoons at a volume of 300 milliliters at 18% concentration, and still I didn't have anything better than this. And so it was real puzzling and real discouraging. So what I ended up doing is, instead of wasting any more paper on this on these 4x5 tests, I had some strips of paper laying around the darkroom. So when I'm cutting paper down from 8x10 size to different smaller formats, I oftentimes have these little strips. They're maybe 1 inch wide and about 8 inches long, and they've been laying face up in my darkroom on the table with the light on. Whenever I do have the room lights on, they've been here for weeks or months. And so what happens with this silver gelatin paper is you have a thing called auto-developing. It'll actually turn kind of slightly pinkish or purplish colored, and you can see based on how much things were sitting over it, like a piece of paper was sitting here, maybe one here at one time, but it tends to turn color just from the action of the light without any developing at all. So I figured, okay, I'm going to use this as a test, and because this has been so highly exposed, this has been super highly exposed, if you were to stick this in strong developer, this would turn black. It has been fogged completely black. So what I did is I wanted to test out my 2 paper developers. So remember I had 2 solutions of paper developer poured up. I had the 2-week-old 1+15, and then I had the fresh 1+10. So I stuck this part of the paper, this whole section of the paper, in the 1+15 2-week-old developer, left it there for a little over a minute. It turned dark gray but not completely black. Then I put just this part here into the new 1+10, the newer, stronger developer, and it turned black. So between looking at these 2 before the bleaching step, this was dark gray, this was black. Then I stuck this whole section here into the bleaching agent, the stuff I had just poured up that I didn't get any good results on, right? And what happened? Well, surprisingly, the section of the paper that got more development, with a stronger developer, bleached out much better, much closer to paper white. There is a slight beigeish, yellowish tinge to it. And this was maybe only 10 minutes or so. I can't remember the length of time that I bleached it for. And this here, again, was the part that was not developed as strongly. It looked very close in tone to the other before the bleaching, but it didn't reverse much at all. So it acted more like a mid-tone. So this was a very surprising result. And what it showed me is that there is a reaction happening between the exposure and the developing agent and the bleaching agent, in that you need a strong developing on the first development in order to get a strong reversal. And it's counterintuitive, because thinking about it, this part of the paper that was originally black after the first development, you think it would be harder to bleach it. You think it would take more bleaching action to bleach it paper white because it starts off darker. And you would think this section, being not as dark, would be easier to bleach white. But that's not what happens. It's counterintuitive, but the paper that started out with a stronger developing and was darker bleached whiter. And the part of the paper that was not quite as dark, didn't get as strong of a developing with a weaker developer, didn't bleach very much. So that explains why this result was here. So what I ended up doing is I ended up doing a new series of tests using only the strong 1+10 fresh developer. The next test I did is another sheet of this new paper, this resin-coated grade 2 in luster finish. And I was going to go out and expose it at 2 stops under ISO 3, so that's like ISO 0.8, which was 1/8 of a second at f5.6, no pre-flash, the fresh 1-to-10 strong developer. This is the 18% bleaching agent at 300 milliliters that included 4 teaspoons of citric acid powder. I bleached it for 20 minutes squeegeed it, and then I gave it enough of a second exposure to give it a almost black border. But the mistake I made on this is when I went to take the film holder out to the camera in the front porch, I wasn't sure which side of the film holder had paper on it. Instead of going back in the darkroom to check, I pulled the dark slide out about an inch. And so what I ended up doing is fogging the paper here, the first third of the paper. But what's interesting about it is the part of the paper that got heavily fogged with room light bleached out to a lighter tone than even the highlights of this patio scene. But the patio scene is very nice. It is much better than what I was having earlier. And I'm trying to get the glare off this. So it's not bad. Now you can tell because the second exposure was not heavy enough, because the border around the paper is not black enough. It's more of a grayish, dark gray. So what I did with the results from that was the first promising results of the whole day, is I went ahead and got another sheet of paper, and the same paper, no pre-flash, using the fresh 1+10 developer for both developing steps, 18% bleach, the same bleaching agent. This is ISO 0.8, again, an eighth of a second, and f5.6. I bleached this for 30 minutes. And it bleached it completely paper white. I mean, it was like this slight beige colored, but there was no dark gray on it at all. And then I exposed it under the enlarger at f22 for 2 seconds. So it's twice the exposure of the second exposure as the other one I just showed you. So the edges are darker, the shadows are dark. This is by far the best results I've had. I mean, look at that. Let me see if I can get it focused for you. Okay, this is, now we're getting somewhere. This is getting closer to what I'm looking for in this process, okay? First of all, starting at the edges. So the outer edges are almost black, indicative of the fact that I got the second exposure right. The highlights on the cushion of the chair and on the stucco wall are wonderful. They're not blown out, but they're bright enough. I have great midtones here. There's lower zone 3-ish detail in the shaded part of the stucco. What I really love about this little table here is a tiled, inlaid tile table, and it's getting direct noontime sun, and then it's shiny, and it's reflecting that off onto the wall. So this is not a fingerprint. That's actually a reflection of the light off my little inlaid table. But what a great picture. I mean, this is what I've been hoping for. Now, there's a couple artifacts you might notice. There's a scratch here, there's one over here, and there's one somewhere else. I forget now. But so there's a few scratches. I think that happened, oh, right here. That happened during the rinse. One of the corners of the other paper must have scraped along it in my rinse tray, and I'm going to have to be careful about that. But this is the best exposure I've had in this whole process. You notice the little ornament is out of focus, so I have a nice narrow depth of focus. Look at that luster finish on the paper. Isn't that wonderful? I'm real encouraged from this last result. So let's recap what I did. Okay, so this is the Arista Grade 2 resin-coated matte finish paper, no pre-flash. This was exposed at an ISO of 0.8, which is 2 stops below ISO 3, eighth of a second at 5.6 in bright morning sun. I used a solution of 18% hydrogen peroxide into 300 milliliters, a total volume of 300 milliliters, with 4 teaspoons of citric acid powder. I bleached it for 30 minutes. Developing was in the Ilford multigrade liquid concentrate diluted 1+10, about a minute and a half to 2 minutes on each developing step. The second exposure was F22 at 2 seconds under my enlarger. And what a wonderful picture. This is coming very close to what I'm hoping to be able to achieve consistently with this process. I don't think I've had this good of results with Harman Direct Positive paper, in fact. I'd like to briefly compare these two Grade 2 prints. The one on your left is the Grade 2 glossy that was exposed 2 weeks ago. The one on the right is the Grade 2 matte finish exposed today. They both had a fresh developer. The one on the left was 1 plus 15, the one on the right is 1 plus 10. And they both, I think the one on the left was 15% peroxide, the one on the right is 18% peroxide. I think what it shows me, however, is that the contrast of the image can be controlled when you're using this grade 2 paper. The contrast of the image is heavily dependent upon the concentration and freshness activity of your primary first developer. And I think you can modulate the strength of the developer, the first developer, to get the kind of contrast you want in your scene. It seems evident to me now. And so that's one of the lessons going forward with this, is using the sufficiently strong developing agent to match the scene's brightness range with the kind of contrast you want in the final print. So what really remains to be seen is if I can go out, let's say tomorrow or the next time I'm able to do this, into the landscape, maybe at northeast Albuquerque by the foothills of the Sandias, and try to get a landscape photo of the Sandias with more sky, more dark green trees, and seeing how the shadows and the tones hold up. But until next time, this is Joe Van Cleve, and I hope that you are encouraged by my progress, and keep following this series, and where I get to hopefully make more consistent results. And when I get to the point where I'm able to make these 4x5 prints in consistent quality in various lighting conditions, then I'm going to break out my homemade 8x10 box camera and try these in the 8x10 format. Well, until next time, keep creating and have a great day.